So when it came to manifestation, the biggest game changer for me was actually understanding what the ego is. And you might be asking yourself, what is the ego? So basically, we have two sides of our mind. We have the logical side of our mind, and then we have the imaginative side of our mind. But when you start to think about it, we don't really live in a very logical world. When you start to think about it, nothing really is logical. We live on a planet that is basically a floating rock, and we're right next to a massive ball of fire. And then there's just all these other planets surrounding us as well that don't really make much sense either. So then you start to ask yourself what really is logical, and quite frankly, nothing is logical. And that's where your logical side of your mind can start to get you stuck a bit, because the logical side of your mind holds a lot of limits, um, just limitations. Because what can't we do? I know we are humans, um, but that's, when it comes to manifestation, the whole thing is understanding that we aren't really meant to have limiting beliefs, because anything really is possible if you put the belief behind it. And on the topic of the ego is very, or the logical side of your mind as well, they're basically the same thing. Um, the ego is very evidence based. It wants evidence before it sees it, but the way to live a fulfilling life and living life the way it's meant to be intended to is by believing it, then see it. The ego wants to see it, then believe it. So when you start to separate yourself from the ego, you really start to free yourself. You free yourself from all these limitations you've had. You start to understand that it is trying to make you stuck, but it just doesn't know any better. That's just its job. That's just what the ego does. But when you start to understand that you are the observer of your thoughts, you can either choose if you want to side with the logical side, or you want to side with the imaginative side of your mind. You have a choice. You're right in the middle of both of them. What one do you want to choose? What one do you want to choose? So yeah, it's kind of simple as that. But you've got to understand that the ego will definitely try to fight you on this. It's ever since you've kind of been born, all those years, that's how long the ego has been functioning for. It's just kind of been sucking up these logical thoughts from society, from other people, your family, all that kind of stuff, and it's just kind of just mushing them all together. But then when you start to approach life the new way with a manifestation and understanding how reality actually works, you understand you don't actually have to believe all that anymore. You can actually separate it, and that is quite literally the most effective thing you can do for your life, because everyone wants to live a fulfilling life. They want to live a life that you know, full of the desires that they have within. But you've got to understand, if you really want to achieve that, you need to understand what the ego is and how to just know when it's thinking for you. So the first action you can take is just understand the ego will be, fighting back. It's anytime you start to deny it and just kind of just say, nope, these are not my thoughts, it will try argue with it. But that's when you just don't argue back at all. Your only task right now is to just deny it and understand that it is not you. These are not your thoughts. These are just thoughts from an old awareness. And every time you deny it, every time that you just no, this is not me, the ego loses power, and it loses power very, very fast. Because the right way to live, I mean, you can live life any way you want, but the most effective way to just live live a life full of whatever you want to live, like just whatever you see within here, and actually externalizing it, is just understanding that you have to believe it first, then see it, and separate from your ego. So the ego wants to see it first before it believes it. And obviously that is just not going to get you far at all. Like, the ego is very used to just It wants to see the same repeated loops and patterns over and over again because that's what it's used to. It wants to be comfortable, and that's just how it acts. Like it just doesn't want to kind of die off. It wants to just, it's kind of like a guard dog. It wants what it's used to. Like that's all it kind of knows. But when you start to start denying it and start implementing these new beliefs about yourself, these new like perspectives about lives, it might start barking quite loud. But that's just when you've kind of that's just when you've got to redirect that vision and that focus and that attention, because the ego doesn't know better. It's just like your little guard dog. It just doesn't know better. So every time it kind of just tries to bark back, that's just when you've got to just say, no, these are not my thoughts, and just redirect it to the thoughts that you want to side with. And the more you do that, the more the ego starts to get on board with you. It starts to, start saying that, okay, maybe this is what is right. And it's just about just losing the ego's power, because if you're, starting this new approach of life, understanding manifestation, all that kind of stuff, it doesn't work with outside then within. It works within then outside. And that's just not how the ego works. So that is such a big factor when it comes to actually applying this effectively, is just understanding what the ego is and how it works. And when you understand those two things, it just becomes so much easier, because then you can just get rid of these limiting beliefs. You can break the cycle with these patterns, all that kind of stuff. It's just understanding what the ego is and how it works. It wants to see evidence, and every time it wants to see evidence, because it's just kind of like that. It's like it's not a voice, but it's just kind of just these thoughts that spawn into your mind. And a lot of the time, it's gonna just ask like, "Where is it? Why is it not here yet?" And every time you get thoughts like that, you've just got to say and just go within, because everything is always within. It's always so within as without. So anytime your ego kind of wants to, like, where is it? That's just when you kind of just maybe just say a little affirmation, or you just, paint a little like visual scene within your imagination, because that's all the validation. That's all, that's all the validation you're ever going to need. It's just all within your imagination, because the more you start doing that, the more like every time your ego just wants to ask, like, where is it? Why is it not here now? And you go within straight away. It's, you're just going to get used to that. And then it's eventually going to shut up. And then that's when your manifestation tends to happen, because it starts to understand that, okay, maybe it is like seen within first and that kind of stuff. So, um, yeah, it obviously does sound quite simple, but when you start first doing this, your ego will try it, say, no, this is what we've known for so long, like, you're not right. But that's just when you've got to use your power, because the ego doesn't have any power over you unless you give it to it. So that's just why it's so important to just redirect that attention, that awareness, that power right into your imagination, into your imaginative side. And then, yeah, it's gonna yap a lot, but you've just really got to just stand your ground and just like tell it and just redirect it that all the validation, all the proof we're ever gonna need is always found within our imagination. And the more you do that, the more you attach, the more you just feel freer and you just feel good, because you're not relying on external validation. You're not, getting caught up on these like previous loops, these patterns, all that kind of stuff anymore. Like, you get to select the new. You don't have to keep repeating these old patterns, these old stories, because the new story is always found within your imagination. And yeah, you're probably gonna get thoughts from it just saying like, you've never had that before. That's not very logical. Like, we've never experienced that. But that's just, anytime it says that, anytime those thoughts come within your mind, that's just why it's so important to just see it within, because that's just where the realities are selected. It's all within. So yeah, just practice that. That's kind of all you got to do. Just understand how the ego works, and just when it's thinking for you, because it's just going to keep you stuck unless you don't change this. So That's just why it is so, so important to understand what the ego is and just how to counteract it. And when you do that, this manifestation stuff becomes 10 times easier. I guarantee you that. And that's all for me.